Hey, grab a coffee, grab a tea, grab your Bible, grab a seat. Today we are diving into John chapter 2. I am so excited to have you here. The Gospel of John is incredible. Like I was saying last episode, John is a book that is so rich, it's so deep, it's so significant, while also being so simple and so easy to digest. There was a theologian who said that the children can wade in it, but the elephants can swim. So let's dive into John chapter 2. Okay, so to start off John chapter 2, we are seeing that Jesus and his disciples are invited to a wedding in Cana. And I want to stop right at verse 2 with Jesus being invited. He himself is invited, and Jesus loves to be invited. He loves to be invited to events. He wants to be invited into our lives. And in this time, a wedding was such a significant party. It was one of the most exciting, celebrated events that there was. This shows us that Jesus is not here to wreck a good time, but he is here to be a part of our good times, all of them, every single one. And it also shows us what it means to invite Jesus to a marriage. He goes to that marriage. It's symbolic of how he approaches weddings today. We invite him into our wedding. First, we enter union with Jesus Christ, and then we enter union with our partner. And we want him to be there. We want him to be everywhere. So he's invited here, and he's also invited today in our weddings. Not that I am anywhere close to a wedding. That is not in my cards at the moment. And like I was saying, we want to invite Jesus into our life. We want to invite Jesus everywhere. And I don't know about you, but I don't just want his permission. I want his presence. And so Jesus and his disciples are invited to this wedding, and Mary, Jesus' mother, is also there, and she tells them, "We have no wine." And having no wine is a major, major social issue in this time. A wedding was a party, and this is going to demonstrate very poorly on the couple getting married and the family hosting the wedding. And he says to her in verse 4, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." And this jumped out to me immediately because John uses mine hour in his gospel to talk about the death of Jesus during the crucifixion. And so immediately when he says, "My hour has not yet come," I was brought to communion. And I thought instantly that we remember Jesus in wine, that his blood became like wine for us, right? That's why we drink communion. That's why we participate in it, because he told us that the wine was to represent his blood. So him saying, "My hour has not come yet," Jesus was not wine, but he was going to become it for our sakes. And obviously Jesus winds up performing this miracle, and we can assume that he prayed about it before he went ahead and did it, because he tells us so many times that nothing is of his own, that he is always doing things in alignment with God the Father. And then Mary says to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." This is a very important command for us today. When Jesus says to do something, he wants our obedience in it. We need to walk in obedience to what he's telling us to do, no matter what it looks like. There is obedience required for this miracle to happen. The same way that we see the walls of Jericho fall, the same way that the man is cleansed of leprosy by dunking himself in the Jordan 7 times. There's an obedience required for something to happen. Whatever Jesus told you to do might be weird, it might be strange to you, but he did not say it for nothing. And so he gives them their instruction, and the servants' instructions are to fill the jars with water. And these are stone water pots, and they're large, filled with gallons and gallons and gallons of water each. What is that? And if we think about the context of this situation, they're being told to fill these stone water pots full of water. They're out of wine, and they have no clue who Jesus is. And here's a woman saying, "Do whatever he says." And here's a man saying, "Fill these pots with water." But they listen. They do it anyways. They believe. We can be so quick to doubt Jesus and what he's doing. They need wine, not water. And we can be so quick to say, "Jesus, this is making no sense." We can be so quick to say, "Jesus, this is how you need to turn the water into wine. Jesus, this is how you need to provide for me. Jesus, this is how you need to show up." I've been very guilty recently, very recently, of telling him something that he needed to do in order to provide for me. And he didn't do it. I didn't see any other way out. My faith was so small that I just saw this situation that Jesus Jesus needed to change and everything would be okay. And he didn't do it. He did the opposite. And surprise, not only is it okay, it's more than okay, and I was set free from an idol in that moment. So we don't need to tell Jesus what to do, and we definitely don't need to tell him how to do something. Take it from me. And I also want to point to you how he's saying to fill the jars with water. They already have the jars, they already have the water. He's using something that they already have on hand. He could have made wine appear coming out of a magical fountain in the middle of the room, but he used what was on hand instead. Every miracle in your life, every promise in your life will come to fruition with what is on hand. He will always use what's on hand, and if he can't use something that's on hand, chances are he's going to build it up in your life. And even when we see Jesus heal, the faith was already on hand. The faith was already present. How many times doesn't Jesus say, your faith has made you well? He's always going to use what's on hand, and we can never doubt his ability to do so. Expect him to show up and work what's already going on. And we also see that Jesus wants us to be a part of the miracles. He could have done this all by himself. No one would have had to lift a finger in order to fill these water pots. But the servants, they go and they fill the water pots and they go to serve the wine, and now they're a part of this miracle. They play a very special role, and it's going to be very, very close to their hearts because they got to contribute to it. And it's not their work, it's not our work that allows a miracle to happen, but Jesus is a friend, right? Jesus, friend of sinners. He wants to take us along. He wants us to share in the blessing. And what better way for us to share in the joy of the blessing than to be a part of the very work ourselves? And we see right from verse 7 that they filled the jars to the brim. So these jars are getting filled up completely, all the way 100%, which could mean a couple of things. First of all, every single thing that we do for Jesus, we should do with full capacity. Every single thing that he asks of you, you should show up 100%. That pot gets 100% filled every time with your effort, with your faith, with your dedication. We show up for Jesus. He tells us to do something and we do it all the way. And this also shows us that there was no room to add anything else. The jars were completely full of water, so he wasn't going to add anything to it, which means that this is a miracle of transformation. We know that when Jesus shows up to a situation, nothing is going to stay the same. When you commit your life to Christ, when you fill up your stone water pot, you're going in water, you are coming out good wine. And spoiler alert, you're not just coming out good wine, you're coming out the best wine that anyone has ever had. He is going to transform you, and it is going to be for the better. We supply the faith, he supplies the rest. And in verse 8, Jesus tells them, draw some out and take it to the master of the feast. And so they took it. And we see again, the servants are listening. There's obedience in what they're doing. And we don't know when exactly the water transformed into wine, but we can imagine that this is a step of faith, that they are believing Jesus and they're just doing what he says. When the master of the feast tasted the water now become wine, and he did not know where it came from, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine, but you have kept the good wine until now. And that was very custom for a party. When everyone was still cohesive, you would serve really good tasting wine because they were going to remember it. And then when people were a little more lost in their thoughts, they would serve the worst wine because people wouldn't remember that. And now the master of the feast is saying that it's the opposite. And this shows us that Jesus is compassionate. They could have survived with water. They would not have died. This wasn't a life or death situation. This was a situation involving humiliation and reputation. And Jesus performed that miracle because he's compassionate, because he cares. And Spurgeon said that verse 10 is similar to what the devil's house would look like. If you looked inside the windows, you would see Satan bring out a good wine, and then once you've drank enough of it and your brain is muddled, he brings out something far, far worse. And he says that you have kept the good wine until now. So there's always more coming, but we are invited to have good wine now. We will see Jesus show up now. We will see miracles and lives transformed now. We live in that moment. And he's saying this to the bridegroom. So this is a miracle that also changed the way that people regard them. God will change the way that people see you. And verse 11 tells us that this is the first of Jesus's signs. Jesus did this in Cana in Galilee, and he manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. We have Mary showing us that we need to expect Jesus to show up, but that we don't need to tell him how. We have the servants showing us to obey without question. The bridegroom shows us that Jesus loves to save the day. The master of the feast shows us that Jesus always has something better coming. And the disciples show us that all of this was real, that this happened. They are witnessing. Remember, I said that John's account was going to be an account of witnesses, and it was also going to be an account of 7 miracles, and this is the first one that we are seeing. It's a miracle of conversion, and this is signifying something much, much larger than just wine. We had Moses turn water into blood in the Old Testament. And John 1:17 says, "For the law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ." We have Moses transforming water into blood, and he gave us the Old Covenant, which is highlighting the fact that the law means death. And now we have Jesus turning water into wine, which shows us that the new covenant is going to be of celebration. It's going to be of joy. It's new and it's good. Jesus is saying with this miracle that the old is coming to an end and the new is coming. He's here to bring something new. He tells us in Luke 5 verse 37 that you cannot put new wine into old wineskins. This is new wine. So he's turning water into wine, but he's telling us so much more. He's telling us all about the new covenant that he is here to bring. In the next section of this chapter is Jesus cleansing the temple. The Passover of the Jews was at hand, and he's in the temple, and he finds those who were selling oxen and sheep and pigeons, which would all be used for sacrifice, and the money changers sitting there, and he drives them out. He cleanses the temple of them. He drove them all out of the temple, and he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And he says, "Do not make my Father's house a house of trade." Jesus is upset. This is supposed to be a place of worship, and they've turned it into a place of business. He's showing us his authority in this chapter. He has the authority to clean out the temple because he is God. He's God in the flesh. And the Jews are upset, and they say to him, "Why do you think that you can do this?" And Jesus answers them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." And he is not talking about the temple. That very temple would in fact be destroyed much later down the road. I think the temple is destroyed around AD 70. Jesus is talking about the temple that is his body, which is going to be destroyed. When the Bible was written, crucifixions were well known, so they didn't go into much depth because it was understood by the readers of the time. You and I do not understand how awful and horrendous a crucifixion is. His temple will be completely destroyed beyond recognition, but in 3 days, he is going to raise it up. And verse 21 confirms, and it says, "But he was speaking of the temple of his body." And we have to remember that you have the Spirit of God living within you. The very Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead is living within inside you. Your body is a temple, and you should treat it as such. And I find it interesting that first off in John 2, he's telling us about a transformation. He's giving us a conversion miracle. And then right after, we're told about cleansing. So I want to say to you, if you have recently converted to Jesus, to freedom, don't be surprised when cleansing comes. There will be things that Jesus cleanses you of, and that's where we have to walk in faith. And I promise that anything that Jesus cleanses you of, he will restore. He will restore abundantly. He will restore it better than it was before. So if you're in a period of cleansing, do not be afraid. My entire life was cleansed when I first came to Jesus. For quite a long time, it was just me and Jesus, and he's a God of restoration. We already know that. He will always fill any void that he creates, and he will never make a void without the intention to fill it. In fact, he's probably making a void because he wants to fill it. He wants to replace what's in your life with what he has for you. If you're anything like me, when you've kind of built things on your own for so long, and then he comes and he takes everything down, it can feel really stressful. It can feel really scary, but he is taking things down in your life because he is going to make them way, way, way better than you could ever possibly imagine. I have so many testimonies of that. And we end John chapter 2. It says that many believed in his name when they saw the signs that he was doing, but Jesus on his part did not entrust himself to them because he knew all people. He knows what's in our minds. He knows what's in their hearts. He can see that this is light faith. This is sheer faith. They're believing because they see something. They're not believing because there's a change in their heart. And verse 25 says, "And needed no one to bear witness about man," which shows that he is secure in what he's doing. He's secure in his purpose. He knows what he is here to do, and he doesn't need the approval of anyone else us to go ahead and do it. He's solid in that purpose, and that's how you and I should walk as well. Not needing anyone to validate us, not needing anyone to approve of us. We are here and we have a kingdom purpose, and we're just going to walk that out, whatever it looks like, knowing that we have Jesus right by our side. Every time that you are doing something new and something scary, wishing that you could sit and talk to Jesus, you can. He is so available for you, to comfort you, to guide you, to change you, to transform you. He cares about all the things that you feel as a human. If he didn't care about our human experience, he wouldn't have sent us here. If he didn't care about our human experience, he wouldn't have came down to experience it himself. He cares and he's with you. He's a personal God. I say it all the time. This John challenge is to inspire your personal relationship with Jesus Christ, because that's what he wants from you. He wants to sit with you. He wants to talk to you every single day because he loves you so much. I say all the time, I love you, but he loves you so much more. Thank you so much for sitting with me through John 2, however you're watching, whether it's on TikTok, on YouTube, on Spotify, as a podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in and for doing this with me and for getting to know Jesus. I just know that he's so proud of you. I'm so proud of you, and I can't wait to continue going through the gospel with you. I love you so much.